Good morning. I want to thank Nicholas Bornosis and Capital Link for the generous invitation. I also want to express my deep regret that the rules surrounding the shutdown of the federal government do not permit me to be there in person at this time. And before I begin, I must tell you that my remarks today are my views as an individual commissioner, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Maritime Commission as a whole. Now, when it comes to any discussion about U.S. federal maritime policy in the 21st century, the constantly increasing degree of uncertainty in so many factors affecting ocean shipping is impossible to ignore. Now, at the Commission, we primarily work with the people that deal with the massive amounts of goods that come into and out of the United States on container ships. This is U.S. importers and exporters, intermediaries, terminal operators, ports, truckers, warehouse operators, and of course the big cargo ship owners, operators, and alliances. To these stakeholders, many of whom I know are in the audience, I have the same thing to say to you that my 11-year-old daughter said to me when we visited Disney World last March. She said, "Dad, I hope you like roller coasters." And I don't mean to treat this too lightly. The people that run our international ocean supply chains do truly deserve a tremendous amount of credit for just managing the vast categories of volatile conditions that make their job so challenging. Today, the uncertainties in global shipping arise from so many different places. I'll mention a few. Number one, global political issues that directly affect ocean shipping, such as terrorism in the Red Sea affecting the Suez Canal and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Number two, changes in trading patterns, often made even more unpredictable by rapidly changing tariffs and trade rules across the world. Number three, natural disasters, including hurricanes and storms, but also incidents such as droughts in which recent years have lowered water levels in the Panama Canal. That's lowered their capacity and raised the cost of transit. Number four, accidents such as the crashing of a massive container ship into a vital Baltimore bridge, or the more recent incident when nearly 100 containers fell off a ship berthed at the port of Long Beach. Number five, regulatory uncertainty. Of course, national regulations and even state regulations, but also the confusion surrounding the contentious debate over decarbonization regulation at the International Maritime Organization and what impact that will have on the industry and the flow of goods. Number six, big ocean container lines changing their business models, sometimes leaving old carrier alliances and entering into new agreements. For example, the shakeup that occurred last year that saw Maersk and MSC break up their alliance, followed by a quick remarriage of Maersk in a new alliance with Hapag-Lloyd. Number seven, labor issues. Of course, not just like the International Longshoremen Association strike last year in the United States, here on the East Coast, but all around the world, we've seen a lot of labor issues recently. And all of those seven doesn't include cyber attacks, container tampering, cargo theft, piracy, sometimes shortage of people to work in maritime trades. All of these put together are very, very real threats. And I would say that any of them alone would not be too much of an issue for an industry that is used to dealing with uncertainties and risk. But it is sort of a perfect storm when you put them all together. I think in the end, this could end up being almost as big as the pandemic. Now, there are some major differences, though. The sort of things that the industry faces today, even though there's so many of them, are all categories of disturbances that the industry has seen in the past. What's different now is the velocity and quantity of changes and challenges, and those continue to increase. It is just where we might have referred once to these sort of challenges as black swan events in the past because they were seen as rarely as a black swan. Now we must acknowledge that they are as common as pigeons in Central Park. It simply is time to stop thinking of any of these events as unusual. They are part of the new normal in international ocean shipping. And for the most part, the shipping stakeholders have demonstrated incredible resiliency. Despite the congestion, delays, and shortages during the COVID pandemic, international ocean shipping continued to sustain a global economy even when there was worldwide human and economic crisis. And none of the challenges that I mentioned above has caused anything near an economic crisis due to those kind of ocean shipping issues. Always, the industry has been able to compensate. Even when both the Suez and Panama Canals were simultaneously affected, ocean commerce found a way to get to people and businesses what they needed. Nonetheless, the pandemic and the continuing need for rapid supply chain adjustments on the part of businesses has demonstrated that the American economy does remain vulnerable to the kind of supply chain challenges that can occur. And if our economy does remain vulnerable, I believe our national security is vulnerable as well. Therefore, maritime security is far broader than having a strong navy and sea lift capacity. Keeping our homeland secure from invasion by sea and protecting American power as part of a national security policy are very much important, of course. But maritime policy overall must go beyond direct threats to our national security and acknowledge it is just as important to have maritime policies that ensure American economic stability, no matter what actions other countries might take. Even having the most powerful navy in the world has a hollow meaning if our nation doesn't engage in vigorous ocean-borne trade. And if you look at histories of maritime powers from ancient times to today, you find that whether it's Persia and Phoenicia before the Common Era, Venice in the Middle Ages, the British Empire, or even the United States in 1794, it's not that economies were developed to allow for strong navies. It was navies that were developed to allow for strong economies. As President Eisenhower said, to amass military power without regard to our economic capacity would be to defend ourselves against one kind of disaster by inviting another. And while I may be a Democrat, I will admit that in the last 50 years, the president, who in his statements and actions seems to appreciate the necessity of a strong civilian maritime capacity, is actually President Donald Trump. In his executive order, Restoring America's Maritime Dominance, released earlier this year, the president laid out some fundamentals of a plan to create a robust civilian maritime capacity in the United States. Now in Congress, Senators Mark Kelly, a Democrat from Arizona, and Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana, have met him and have also introduced the Ships for America Act, aiming to establish a national maritime strategy with a strong U.S. merchant fleet. So fortunately, at least on this one issue, there is bipartisan support and participation in Washington. But make no mistake, we have a long way to go. Today, in the United States, our international commerce comes in on ships made mostly in China and Korea, operated by conglomerates based in Europe, China, Korea, or Singapore, owned by Asians or Chinese, Koreans, and sometimes Greeks, largely under a Panamanian, Liberian, or Marshall Islands flag, and crewed primarily by sailors from the Philippines, Indonesia, China, and the Indian subcontinent. Even the relatively well-paid officers are rarely American, mainly coming from European maritime countries such as Denmark and the Netherlands. The United Nations may be headquartered in New York, but the part of the UN that deals with commercial shipping, as you all know, the International Maritime Organization, is based in London. Now, the United States is by far the largest importer of goods, but it has barely participated in the industries and global system that bring most of those goods here. In terms of tonnage capacity, the People's Republic of China, they have an international commercial fleet that's nearly 10 times the capacity of the US commercial fleet. In terms of shipbuilding in recent years, China consistently builds between 12 and 1,700 commercial cargo vessels every year, with the US building on average less than 10. Now, I don't mean less than 1,000, I mean less than 10 total ships. So that's 12 to 1,700 ships compared to about 10. And only 0.4% of all ocean-going commercial vessels, 0.4, it flies the U.S. flag. Now, one of the statutory purposes of the Federal Maritime Commission is to, quote, encourage the development of an economically sound and efficient liner fleet of vessels of the United States, capable of meeting national security needs and supporting commerce, unquote. So as a commissioner, I am taking a deeper dive into what sort of policies it would take to move the U.S. to a position where it has, say, a revitalized domestic commercial container ship building industry. Now, the conventional wisdom is that it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, due to labor costs, taxes, and regulatory costs just being too high in the United States. However, after doing some more research and touring existing shipyards in Pennsylvania and Alabama, I do believe there's no intractable reason why the U.S. could not build commercial ships again in a competitive manner. Labor and materials costs may be higher here than in China, but other nations such as Korea have largely overcome comparable challenges. Now, China majorly subsidizes its shipyards, of course, but in the long run, such policies could be fought or compensated for. The biggest challenge is that even if all else was equal, China makes so many ships that the economies of scale dramatically drive down the cost of each individual ship. If American industry could count on the hundreds and hundreds of orders per year, I am quite confident there could be a competitive commercial shipbuilding industry in the U.S., just as we have competitive manufacturing in other areas, such as aircraft, high-tech machinery, and heavy equipment. The key challenge would be figuring out how to encourage and pay for such a massive transition. Now, turning to other matters important to America's maritime strategy, the Federal Maritime Commission also has a role to play. As a bipartisan expert agency, we may be small, but we have some potent powers to ensure U.S. shipping is not unduly disadvantaged. For example, the FMC can conduct investigations to, quote, general or special conditions unfavorable to shipping in the foreign trade, unquote, when these conditions are attributable to laws or regulations of foreign countries or competitive methods of pricing practices or other practices of foreign vessel operators. So under these various provisions, we have broad authority to not just regulate the kinds of companies that we regulate normally, but even affecting issues that are not usually regulated. We can even put tariffs on ships coming into the United States. We can make it difficult to do business if we feel, as a commission, and if it is substantiated, that there is significant issues contrary to shipping in the U.S. Now, we've already initiated a couple of investigations that are important. One of them looks into 7 global choke points around the world: the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the Straits of Gibraltar, the Malacca Strait, the Singapore Strait, and the Northern Sea Passage, and the English Channel. Many, if not most, of these vital maritime passages have seen increased involvement by the Chinese government, Chinese companies, or both over the past decades. We have also, on a bipartisan basis, initiated an investigation of the flagging rules and practices of foreign governments. As many of you know, qualifying an international cargo ship for a U.S. flag, or even a flag of the UK, Germany, France, or Japan, ends up costing the operator much more than flagging with certain foreign countries. Some of these countries have flags of convenience that might be creating unfavorable shipping conditions in the foreign trade of the United States, and we have decided to look more closely at them. One concern is that some of these flags might be helping to enable vessels to operate even unsafely, or further enable shadow fleet activities. Another is that there is now a race to the bottom situation where flag states compete by lowering standards and easing compliance requirements, lowering the cost of flagging vessels beyond a point where efficiency, reliability, and safety of the vessels used in ocean shipping can be assured. Both of these investigations, as well as other investigations and increasing the rigorousness of our oversight over agreements among cargo vessel companies and port operators, all of these things are aimed at ensuring America's importers and exporters are not put at an undue disadvantage as they compete with their counterparts in other countries. For commercial arrangements, any commercial arrangements, to work among various people, they must be fair to all sides. Now, I agree with President Trump as well as Senators Kelly and Young and their bipartisan coalition in Congress that we must have a more assertive U.S. maritime industrial policy to make sure that U.S. supply chains are as stable as possible in an unpredictable world. I also believe that to ensure continuity over time, U.S. maritime policy should also be bipartisan and take into account as much as practicable the views of private sector stakeholders. And that's where I must once again express my deep regret that circumstances do not allow me to be with you in person today. I truly hope that sooner rather than later I can meet with you again in person so I can hear more about what you think and how you think that we could do a better job of improving our maritime policy. In the meantime, you can always reach out to me if you come to Washington or email me at dmaffei, that's D-M-A-F-F-E-I, at fmc.gov. Given the circumstances, I do want to express again how grateful I am for allowing me to still participate. Many, many thanks, and I do hope to see you soon.